While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America who are approaching or already into retirement, you've tuned into iRetire4Him, the voice and resource of the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, as I am each and every podcast, joined by the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Bruinsma. We invite you to check us out online, retirementreformation.org, and on Facebook, Retirement Reformation. In retirement, we've realized that relationships are super important. How do we know which relationships we should grow, which relationships we should eliminate, and which relationships we should start? Over this 3-part series, Bruce Bruinsma and I are digging deep into the significance of relationships in retirement. We discussed in our last podcast how we cultivate and fertilize our existing relationships and gave you 7 different things you can do to keep them growing. In this podcast, we're going to talk about how do we eliminate the weeds of toxic relationships in our lives. And in our next podcast, in the final podcast of this series, we're going to talk about planting the seeds of new relationships. It's often said that we'll take with us only to heaven our relationship with our Heavenly Father. But I don't think that's true. I believe we'll also take the relationships we've established here on earth and we take them into heaven. That's why we need to really focus on our relationships in retirement. Bruce Bruinsma, thanks for being back on iRetire4Him.
Yeah, this is, I'm excited about our conversation today, not because it's a fun conversation, it's kind of difficult, but I think it is absolutely critical. I was just thinking back, when I was growing up, I remember at one point in time, my mother saying to me, said, Bruce, and this was, I must have been maybe in the, 7th grade, maybe 8th grade, somewhere in that area. And she said, Bruce, be careful who you associate with because you will become like them. And it took me a long time to continually unwrap the onion that is in that wisdom. And so the toxic relationships that we have, and the subject, frankly, is perhaps for many of us emotionally challenging, but it is absolutely essential that we able to be discerning through the eyes of the Holy Spirit, in God's eyes, about who it is that we're dealing with and who it is that is influencing us. So when we talk about toxic relationships, I think the simplest way to think about that is who is influencing you in a way that will separate you from what Jesus would have you do. And that's a way to think about a definition of a toxic relationship.
So when your mom said that to you, be careful who you hang out with because they'll end up influencing you. Didn't you argue with her and say, Mom, no, I'm going to influence them?
Of course. Absolutely.
Well, you left that part of the conversation out because that's the argument I had with my mom.
That part of the conversation probably didn't take place for a couple of years later when that conversation was revisited. And I was becoming aware of that as a Jesus follower, one of my roles is to influence others and to represent Him. So I remember going back to Mom and saying, hey, you remember that conversation we had? I'd like to talk about that some more. So isn't it part of my responsibility to be able to influence them? And she looked at me and said, and she agreed. She said, yes, it definitely is. But in a relationship where the other person is, and she didn't use the word toxic, it was another word, poisonous, I think is the word that she used. Negatively influencing is so strong that in fact, most of the time, you're really best to avoid them and to be able to use your influence in ways that will produce more fruit.
It's tough to have eyes for that, but as you grow older, it seems like it's easier to identify. I don't know that it's easier to move away from those relationships, but in your adult years, have you found yourself having to move away from relationships that you realized weren't healthy for you?
Yeah, there were, frankly, a couple of church experiences where some of the other supposed Christ followers were the most toxic people that I could possibly imagine. Everything was negative. There was nothing positive. There was no evidence of fruits of the Spirit. Was always a problem, whether you're talking about, the minister's sermon, or you're talking about how the kids are acting, or you're talking about, whatever it may be. It was always negative. It was always bad. You never walked away with anything other than, man, that really wore me out. And so to finally recognize that even in that environment, those are toxic people, and that in my Christian walk, I didn't need them in my life. I needed people that could have those other 7 things that we talked about during our last podcast.
So for you and Judy, as a married couple, you've been married 6 decades. You probably had some couples in your lives that were friends that maybe you had to walk away from because they chose a different path. Was there ever a time where you had to walk away from a toxic relationship as a couple?
Yeah, there was one particular circumstance where a couple that we made friends with and that we were friends with and started doing things together. But as we did more and we got to know them better, we understood the things that they enjoyed and wanted to do did not fit within the boundaries of our Christian walk. And so we took a couple of passes at seeing if we could influence them to change, came to the conclusion that where they were at that point, God was going to have to deal with them, and it wasn't going to use us as the vehicle to do it. And we just simply had to step away. So recognizing the signs and establishing boundaries are, I think, 2 of the keys to dealing with issues of toxicity in relationships.
So say that again. Recognizing
the signs, okay, of a toxic relationship, and then setting your boundaries within, your walk with Jesus, and then being able to be comfortable with love, communicating those. So recognizing the signs, establishing boundaries, and communicating about those with love, I think are critical steps to managing relationships that have toxic elements in them and to them and with them.
Yeah, that's the tough part. You threw in that last one and you're like, ooh, there's the zinger. Being willing to communicate those things, because it's one thing to recognize the signs. Okay, this relationship may not be the most healthy for our marriage, and setting boundaries so that we can protect ourselves, but then communicating that, sometimes it's easier just to let the relationship die by not communicating at all, as opposed to communicating.
Sometimes that's easier. However, I would simply add, and we have certainly done that, but I would add that I think a better way is part of your witness, be able to find a way to be able to communicate with them so that they have a model that God can use through maybe totally different circumstances and totally different places in totally different ways, that they can think back to, boy, do you remember when Judy and Bruce talked to us about X? That can be part of their reality down the road. May not impact anything today.
Wow. Those are powerful words. Listen, Bruce, we got to take a break. We got Peter Vanacore coming back. You got another conversation coming up with him. And when we come back, we're going to finish up this conversation about, now that we've identified toxic relationships in our lives, how do we eliminate it, fix it, or save it? Is that something we should be doing? You're listening to iRetire4Him, the voice and resource of the Retirement Reformation. Hang on for segment 2. We got a special guest for you.
Recreating Retirement is an interactive small group study helping you to move from nothing to what's next. You can join us on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. East Coast time on Facebook Live. Our goal for this study is to provide a group setting for interaction and new ideas while leading you through a first step in your journey from retirement to reformation. Here's the big idea. During the next 5 years, 5,000 small groups will experience this journey of discovery in churches and faith-based organizations across the country. Is your church a place where recreating retirement needs to be planted? Join us online to experience the study or prepare to lead a small group at your church or ministry. Email us at contactus@retirementreformation.org or go to our website at retirementreformation.org. That's retirementreformation.org.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him. As we do in every second segment of every show, we bring in a special guest that's got a story to tell about how God is working in their work, in their lives, or in their retirement. Well, we've got kind of a part 2 to a story coming up here with Peter Vanacore. Bruce, why don't you tell us what's going on today?
So welcome, Peter. We're so glad you're back with us. We've had a couple of conversations and doing some scheduling of things that we can work together. But the reason why I wanted you on to tell a little bit of your story is that you're in kind of a tough spot right now, and where you had things pretty well lined out in terms of your separation from a ministry that you've given leadership to for a long time. There was a new leader that was ready to step in. You had a board that was doing that. And I think it was just happening at the end of when we interviewed you before, was that you had just simply learned that the board had made the decision that the gentleman that was supposed to take over within a month was not going to be the right person, and you were dragged back into what it is that you thought you were leaving. And then I put that in the context of some of the conversations that we've had and some of the future directions that I think God has for you. But right now you're kind of stuck in the middle, and my guess is that your wife really isn't very happy about that. And so talk about that stuck place for just a moment and how you're working through and starting to deal with that, because I think there will be a number of people in our audience that either have experienced it and will associate it or are going to experience it in some fashion.
Yeah, we all do in different times of our life. We go through things that seem like this is not the way things should go, and certainly not the way you want them to go. But God has you here. And so it took me a few days to recoup after that revelation that things weren't going to work out the way we wanted it to do. And so it was, I would say that my wife and I prayed, my team prayed, my board prayed. And after a few days, I finally just said, okay, this is God, this is where you have me right now. What's next? And what I really tried to do over the next 2 weeks was not make any rash decisions, like on how to go next. I said, I'm just going to pray. I'm going to sit back, just continue what I'm doing, and see where God leads. And so that's where I've been for the most part, made some steps. We're kind of, we were really on plan C for our succession, and we're actually looking back at plan B again, which I think was a good choice in the beginning, but it's so I think that what we're seeing, I think for my team and myself and my wife, is that we just have to trust God, and so many exciting things are happening that I really can't complain on any level.
Remind our audience the organization that you've given leadership to for a long time.
It's 25 years or something, isn't it?
Well, I've been in the mentoring field for 40, but I've been in the process of helping Christians develop mentoring programs for 20 years. And the last 16, I've been the executive director of the Christian Association of Youth Mentoring. And what we do is we go and to any Christian who really wants to see God reach kids in the community and also in the church through mentoring, we help them get started in a way that's our three big ideas are it has to be safe, effective, and sustainable. So we teach evidence-based best practices in a Christian context and really help them design, train, equip, and then really do quality assurance to make sure they're staying on the right track.
Well, what a great ministry that has been. And I know based on our conversations, it was you were going through a process and will continue to go through a process then of as that will come to a close in God's way and God's timing and God's methodology. But then there will be that question of what's next again. And you are so uniquely prepared for 40 years in mentoring that it would be my prayer that we can tap into some of those resources. What's been during this period of time now where you had to take a big breath and step back and let go and let God? How would you describe the biggest challenge of that?
I think there are a few things. One is, you start looking ahead. You're at that point, and there are things, and Bruce, I've been talking to you about just what to do after this, and I was planning on staying part-time as long as they wanted me where I'm at. I'm not planning on abandoning anything. They still need me for some things. But I was talking to my denomination about what I could do. I was talking to a local foster care ministry about helping them develop mentoring here in Massachusetts. And it's a great ministry called Fostering Hope. And I thought, so I had all these things and talking to all these people. I had announced it. It was in different groups that, well, I'm no longer going to be executive director at the end of March. So that having all those things and those kind of looking forward and saying, God, what's the next step? And all of a sudden, oh, you're back to square one here again. That was tough. And it was tough for my wife because I think she's just a little tired of me taking phone calls and emails and messages, into the evening, which you have to do in this type of thing. I work with people on all coasts and in different continents. So I don't have a lot of choice and timing on a lot of things. And she was looking forward to maybe that slowing down a bit for me. And so I think that for me, the challenge is just changing my perspective right now on what God has, bringing my wife together, coming along with it. And we have really, just yesterday, we were walking and ran into my pastor's wife, who just really gave us some good advice. Just said, listen, whatever choices you make, just pray, step forward, and no matter what it is, God's going to work it out. And I think I'm just going by in faith to see how God's going to work out the rest of this.
Well, I think that's good advice, and I think there are many people. I won't go into a big description, but there's a word liminal. Liminal means the intervening period between two changing events, and so we're going to do some podcasts on that whole subject because it's really helpful. And there are so many people that don't recognize that they're in a liminal period. Mm-hmm. and don't have the faith that liminal period isn't where they're going to be stuck for forever, but that it's part of a transition. And you are in one of those liminal periods and learning how to deal with that. So it's interesting, as we've seen, some people when they're in that period, they're anxious and they're depressed and they're, all kinds of things. And yet, from God's perspective, that's a time of new freedom and new opportunity and joy to look forward. And so dealing with that time, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted our audience to just kind of connect a little bit with you in terms of where you are, because I'm sure there are many of them that are in a similar spot, not same circumstance, but they're in that liminal period of transition. And knowing that, in fact, one of the steps is to let go and let God and then to, be faithful in that process is so critical. So is there any other advice or any other things that God's putting on your heart that you think would be helpful for people to hear based upon, where you are and the circumstance that you're going through?
I think it's, for me, the big part of it is realizing that, I'm 68 years old. I have friends who are retired. There are kids that I worked with years ago that are retired now. I mean, and what I just look forward to say, I could have a lot of years left. My parents lived into their 90s, and I just want to see how God uses me for the rest of those years, as long as I can do it. And so I believe for me, it's an exciting time. And I think we have to look at this time as not just, okay, I want to travel. Yeah, you can do a lot of fun things. There's a lot of things. I want to spend time with my grandkids and all that, and really invest in them also. But there's this anticipation that somehow I think God is going to use the next years, whatever they are, in more powerful ways than He's used the past. And I have to say this: I think that in my life, in my 60s, for the work that God's given me, I have been more effective in my 60s than any other time in my life.
Well, what a word of encouragement that is. Thank you for that word of encouragement. And being an 81-year-old, I would embrace those words totally. And as we talk about that, quote unquote, retirement may be as long as 30 years. So there's a planning horizon for you. So, yeah. Peter, thank you for joining us today, and we'll look forward to staying in touch with your journey.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, Peter. And it's also just great to remember that, just because something surprises us doesn't mean it surprised God. And we need to rest in that. You're listening to iRetire4Him. We'll be right back.
Our work on this earth doesn't end when the paycheck stops. God calls us to be faithful for a lifetime. Whether you're looking forward to retirement or you're already there, our all-small group study, Recreating Retirement, will help you understand, engage, and activate what God has for you in this fourth quarter of life. Join Retirement Reformation founder Bruce Brinsma as you consider your past, strengths, spiritual gifts, and your passions, and how they all come together as the call God has for you in these years. Connect with us on our online community group at facebook.com/Retirement Reformation, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern, or if you'd like to bring Recreating Retirement to your church, email us at contactus@retirementreformation.org. Are you ready to start your life-changing journey today?
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him. Wow, what a great conversation having Peter Vanacore back with us today. Bruce, let's jump back into this conversation about toxic relationships and how do we eliminate the weeds of those toxic relationships. I think probably let's deal with the obvious question. Why should we eliminate toxic relationships in our lives?
Whenever I think about toxic relationships, my mind goes back to the Old Testament. And, God, through His prophets and through, His word and through, the books of Testament was doing everything to give guidance to the Israelites on how it is that they should live. And one of the keys that is throughout particularly all the prophets, was the warning not to intermarry, not to be engaged with the pagan tribes around them. And what happened? They engaged with the pagan tribes. They married, the sons married the daughters married the sons, and they enter in, and only bad stuff came as a result of that. And so what God was warning them was, these will be, I'm telling you, these are going to be toxic relationships, and you and your children are going to suffer as a result of it. And, we see that time after time after time after time. And so I think God is still saying the same message to us. Not that we need to set ourselves apart from everyone, But in fact, we need to be aware of what are toxic relationships and acknowledge the fact that they will influence us. Let me give you one other kind of different example. When I was a teenager, I went to camp, and I went to Camp Roger in Michigan, and it was a Christian camp. And there was always a group of guys that came up from South Chicago, from the Christian Reformed churches in South Chicago. And they were always at the camp same time I was. And so when I would come home from typically 2 weeks at camp with my new friends from South Chicago, my mother was always upset. And the reason she was upset was because I had adopted their speaking style, the dems and the does. Here's what it is that we're going to do, Bruce. We're going to do this. And they had a very distinct way of speaking. And I totally not only absorbed it, but I put it on. My mother was an English teacher, and it just drove her nuts. She says, I'm not going to send you to camp anymore. Can't you just keep your language straight? And the answer was apparently no, in that I adopted the negative that came from my friends from South Chicago.
What about in your adult life? Have there been a toxic relationship that you or you and Judy held on to a little longer than you should have?
That's a good question. Let me think about that for a moment. Yeah, but it was within a work situation. There was a time, for a very short time, that I went and worked with a fraternity brother of mine in his business, and he was toxic. The business was toxic. The people he had around him were toxic, and we made a pretty significant move to be there with them. And after about the first month, I said to Judy, I said, man, I'm sorry. We have made a really, really bad mistake. She says, are you telling me our family's going to need to move? And I said, most likely that is what's going to happen. And so it had an impact on our family. And obviously I never forgot the lesson of who it is you're going to work with, who it is you're going to spend time with is absolutely critical to who it is that you are going to be and the meaning and purpose that God will put in your life.
So when we identify, you said we need to recognize the signs of a toxic relationship. We need to set boundaries with people that are toxic in our lives. Is there any fixing a toxic relationship, or should we just go ahead and walk away, eliminate?
I always believe that God can and does create miracles in people's lives, and that would be what you would pray for with them. Can that happen? I always leave the door open for that happening because, he surprises me most of the times. But generally, the answer is you need to remove them from your life. And if, in fact, God will use you to be part of that miracle in their life, either then or at a point in time in the future, He'll make that clear to you. But for your own spiritual health, your own vitality, your own ministry, separating from them is probably the wisest thing to do.
Yeah, Bruce, I find a lot of people in my generation find that those toxic relationships are family. And I don't know if it was as much in your generation, but it definitely is in my generation and the next generation, where those toxic relationships are people they're related to, whether they're half sisters or half brothers or stepbrothers or stepsisters, or as a stepmom or a stepdad or a mom or a dad or a brother or sister. I mean, it could be anybody. What do you have for advice there when it comes to those relationships actually being blood?
Well, you've got the interpersonal piece to that you're kind of questioning about, but I think they're perhaps the wisest approach to that situation is to look for support and find support within the family so that, in fact, it's not just you and that toxic person, but that, in fact, I was advising someone the other day, and there were five siblings. And one of them was just causing absolute total havoc. And as I understood their circumstance, the advice that I gave them was, there are 4 of you that got your head screwed on straight. So you need to be supportive of each other, and you need to communicate to that 5th person that, in fact, you are supporting each other and you would like to be able to support them, but their behavior is keeping you from doing that.
Yeah, it's tough. Family relationships, especially
so hard.
That's tough. Bruce,
there's one other thought for that. When we talk about some of the benefits or the premiums of longevity, one of them that we talk about is the ability to grow emotionally. And when we do that, that gives us the capacity, both the understanding, the emotional capacity, and so on, to be able to deal more effectively with difficult situations. And I typically say to the folks that I'm talking to is that almost every one of you has a difficult situation in your family that you haven't been able to deal with. As you grow emotionally, be open to God's leading for how, in fact, He is now equipping you to be able to step into that difficult situation, either to free yourself, to inform them, and maybe to be a role in changing their life also. But certainly to protect yourself and to be at peace with that, because I see so often in those family relationships, there's a feeling of guilt that somehow they weren't able to influence the brother or the sister or the in-law or whatever it may be. And so to be able to free yourself in your relationship with God and to know that you are representing Him in the best way that you can.
And Bruce, there's so many resources that Retirement Reformation has out there on our website, retirementreformation.org. Is there one specifically we can direct our listeners today to go to for encouragement as they look at the relationships in their lives? Is there one that sticks out in your mind today that you're like, this is a place people should plug in?
Yeah, I think I thought I had a copy of. Oh, here we go. There's a series of devotions that we've written. There's 50 of them, and you can download them on our website. And they have biblical references. They're fairly short. But I think if you would read those each day and contemplate the message that's in them, I think it will make a huge difference in who you are, therefore, and how you view the relationships that you have and how to deal effectively with them.
Make sure you check out all the resources on our website, retirementreformation.org, retirementreformation.org. Bruce, great conversation today. Can't wait for our next conversations. We talk about planting the seeds of new relationships, but great conversation today. Thank you, Bruce. You've been listening to iRetire4Him, the voice and resource of the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim Brangenberg, and Bruce Brinesville, of course, joining us, as he always does, the founder of the Retirement Reformation. We're Christ-following brothers, journeying from retirement to reformation, so we can ultimately say, I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts Jim and Martha Brangenberg and Retirement Reformation founder Bruce Brinesma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I Retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.